When a Sikorsky helicopter crashed into a California hillside on the morning of January 26, 2020, the news went unnoticed. Just another aviation accident. But a few hours later, news started circulating, and there was a notification from a celebrity news outlet, TMZ, that Kobe had succumbed to a helicopter crash. Many people thought it was a hoax, since earlier in the morning he had left a tweet congratulating LeBron James on surpassing him for the NBA all-time scoring list. However, the news was later confirmed, and the world was in shock as to how a healthy 41-year-old basketball legend who had retired 4 years earlier could die so suddenly. These are the final hours of NBA legend Kobe Bryant. On January 26, 2020, on a Sunday morning in Calabasas, California, Kobe Bryant, along with his daughter Gianna Bryant and 6 others, hired a Sikorsky S-76B helicopter registered N72EX. They had chartered the plane from Island Express Holding Corporation via OC Helicopters. Kobe and his crew were flying from John Wayne Orange County Airport to Camarillo, California, where Kobe was scheduled to coach Gianna's team at Kobe's Mamba Sports Academy in Newbury Park. Kobe Bryant was a legendary basketball player who spent his entire 20-year career with the Los Angeles Lakers in the NBA. During his 2-decade career, Kobe Bryant became the face of the Los Angeles Lakers. He played a crucial role in bringing 5 NBA championships to the Lakers in the 2000, 2001, 2002, 2009, and 2010 seasons. His tuning with fellow Lakers legend Shaquille O'Neal in the early 2000s was instrumental in the team's success. His competitive spirit, work ethic, and dedication to excellence purely resonated with fans, and he earned the nickname Black Mamba. Kobe Bryant retired in 2016 at the age of 37, and during his final game, he scored 60 points. It was a fitting farewell and a testament to his enduring impact on the franchise. Bryant still had more to give, though. A year or so after Bryant retired, Gianna, known as Gigi, started to take up the game her dad so passionately loved. Her interest sparked a new connection between Bryant and the sport he had spent years mastering. The hours dedicated to playing, watching, and studying basketball returned, only they weren't for Bryant. They were for Gigi. Coaching initially wasn't on Bryant's retirement radar. He had expressed interest in exploring other interests, particularly creative storytelling with Granity Studios. But when Gigi decided she wanted to play, Bryant was there to coach. Gigi quickly made a local all-star team, which introduced them to many of the girls that would soon form Team Mamba. And on that fateful day, Kobe was going to coach the team, as he had done many times before. On that Sunday morning, at 8:45 a.m., Ara Zobayan, the pilot who was going to fly Kobe and his team, stood in the Atlantic Aviation Terminal at John Wayne International Airport and checked his flight planning app. The helicopter pilot's software showed a blanket of clouds covering the city. The poor visibility meant that large swaths of the region were unflyable. This was a problem because completing the mission was important to Zobayan. Island Express was a small operation with 6 helicopters and as many pilots, and it ran on thin margins. Its business mostly consisted of shuttling passengers back and forth between Long Beach and Catalina Island, a tourist destination 20 miles off the coast. Custom charter flights for high-net-worth individuals were less frequent but far more lucrative. Of all the company's VIPs, Bryant was their best client. And keeping Bryant happy was their #1 job. And as with any client, that meant getting him where he wanted to go. The twin-engine Sikorsky S-76B that Zobayan would fly that day is regarded as one of the safest in the world. But Island Express was only licensed to fly under visual flight rules, meaning that the pilot had to be able to see the ground at all times. Zobayan had an out. He was Island Express's chief pilot, so he skipped writing down his backup plans, left critical risk factors unchecked, and hit submit. He was good to go. Rick Webb, the owner of OC Helicopters, arrived at the terminal to help with the Bryant party's boarding. Zobayan showed Webb the weather map and told him that he had a plan. The direct route to Camarillo over the coast was awash in red, signifying that conditions were too crummy to fly. But if Zobayan stayed inland and east of downtown LA, he could duck through a pass in the hills, cut across the San Fernando Valley, scoot over a low pass, and descend into Camarillo from the east. The conditions still wouldn't be great, and the route would take longer, but he could handle it. Every flight has a safety margin, a multi-layer cushion that protects it from a crash. Island Express had a procedure in place to ensure that its pilots stayed within conservative safety parameters. Called the Flight Risk Analysis Tool, it was an electronic checklist of 69 items that would tally up a number of points indicating the risk factor. If the visibility was below VFR minimums, for instance, the system would add 9 points, and so on. If the score totaled higher than 45, then the pilot could not fly without first consulting management. Enough of those conditions applied on January 26th. The form instructed pilots to write down what they would do if they couldn't complete the flight as planned, and to discuss the situation with the director of operations or the chief pilot. But Bryant needed to get through, and Zobayan had an out. He was Island Express's chief pilot, so he skipped writing down his backup plans, left critical risk factors unchecked, and hit submit. He was good to go. At 9 a.m., Bryant's car pulled up. On the entourage were his 13-year-old daughter Gianna and 2 of her 8th grade team members, Peyton Chester, along with her mother, Sarah Chester, Alyssa Altobelli with her parents, Kerry and John Altobelli. Also on the flight was the Mambas' assistant coach, 38-year-old Christina Mauser, whom the Bryants had gotten to know as a coach at Gianna's private school in Corona del Mar, and the pilot, Ara Zobayan, who was going to pilot the helicopter. An ethnic Armenian raised in Lebanon, he'd moved to the United States in his teens and saved money for flying lessons while working as a parking lot attendant. He got his helicopter pilot's license in 2001, and in 2011, he started working for Island Express. He enjoyed flying celebrities and counted Kylie Jenner and LA Clippers forward Kawhi Leonard among his repeat customers. Overall, there were 9 members on board the helicopter. Initially, Kobe had been set to leave at 9:45 a.m. Team Mamba was slated to play a noon game against Lady Drive Nation. But the night before, Bryant's personal assistant had called OC Helicopters to reschedule, explaining that Bryant wanted to check out another team earlier in the morning. The new departure time was set for 9 a.m. Bryant was running behind schedule. That wasn't unusual. He could show up as much as 2 hours late. This time, he was just a few minutes behind. As soon as he climbed out of the car, Zobayan returned to the cockpit, and Webb escorted the passengers to the helicopter. Bryant and the 3 players all wore team uniforms, black tracksuits with a Nike swoosh and the Mamba Sports Academy logo in white. The passengers piled into the Sikorsky and strapped in as Webb latched the doors. Bryant's favorite spot was the window seat on the left, facing forward. At 9:06 a.m., the fuselage tipped forward and the aircraft peeled away from the ground. On a clear day, the views of the coast and inland mountains would have been stunning. But today the terrain was shrouded in a white haze that gave everything a flat, mystical quality. But this was not an issue since Zobayan was an experienced pilot and he knew this geography intimately. But even Zobayan was prone to mistakes. 5 years before, Zobayan had made a mistake flying. He had been flying in reduced visibility, much like this day. An FAA investigator faulted him for poor planning and for failing to properly review the prevailing weather conditions, but let him off without penalty. At 9:20 a.m., 14 minutes after takeoff, the Sikorsky buzzed past Dodger Stadium and along the concrete bed of the Los Angeles River as it wound to the north. As the helicopter flew past the Silver Lake Reservoir, the airspace was controlled by Burbank Airport, and Zobayan couldn't enter without the airport's permission. The control tower established contact with Zobayan and asked what his intentions were before granting authorization.
72 Echo X-ray, Burbank Tower, Burbank altimeter 3019, Burbank Class Charlie, surface area is IFR, stay intentions.
Zobayan replied by saying he wanted to get through the airspace.
If we can maintain special VFR transition on the 101 westbound 2.
The tower wasn't going to let Zobayan enter the airspace. By FAA regulation, aircraft flying under visual flight rules have to be able to see at least 3 miles. The visibility at Burbank was 2.5. Zobayan had a workaround. When visibility is low, pilots are allowed to request special VFR permission to fly in weather worse than normal. The catch is that the tower can only grant permission if no other aircraft are flying in its airspace at the time. As it happened at that moment, a SkyWest flight was about to land. The Sikorsky helicopter flew in a series of circles just 400 feet above the tidy rows of homes in Glendale.
Yeah, go ahead.
In order to buy time as they awaited for the plane to land so that he could fly past. At 9:32 a.m., after 11 minutes of circling, Zobayan was given permission to enter Burbank airspace, but he wouldn't be able to cut directly west toward Camarillo due to departing traffic in that direction. Instead, he'd have to head north past Van Nuys, the next airport beyond Burbank. As the helicopter heads north, air traffic control tells the pilot to follow the 5 freeway and maintain SVFR conditions. Ara Zobayan confirms that he heard the instructions.
Follow the 5 freeway, maintain special VFR conditions at or below 2,500.
Copy that, we'll maintain special VFR, copter 2 Equus.
At 9:33 a.m., Kobe Bryant's driver texts the group from Camarillo Airport. Just started raining lightly here. At 9:40 a.m., Zobayan approaches Van Nuys airspace and finds the conditions to be not so good, so he decides to contact Van Nuys Tower and requests a special VFR transition clearance. Zobayan's request for a special VFR becomes difficult for the controller to fulfill because at the Van Nuys Tower, the conditions show they are IFR. But Zobayan convinces the tower controller that he can see outside the aircraft, and these are VFR conditions. For some of you who might not understand the difference between VFR and IFR conditions, well, let me explain. VFR is short for Visual Flight Rules, meaning the pilot primarily controls and navigates the aircraft using outside visual references. IFR stands for Instrument Flight Rules. The aircraft is flown using only the instruments, with no visual references to the outside. The reason why Zobayan tried so hard to convince tower controllers at Van Nuys that there were VFR conditions. It is mainly because Island Express helicopters was not certified to fly passengers under Instrument Flight Rules, which are often used when the weather is foggy, and the haze makes it difficult for the pilot to see outside. Zobayan had no permission to fly under such conditions, even though the Sikorsky S-76B helicopter was equipped to do so, and the pilot was IFR rated. Van Nuys eventually approves this transition request, and Zobayan heads to the southwestern corner of the valley. As he heads there, the Van Nuys controller asks Zobayan if he wants to contact SoCal Approach once he clears Van Nuys. SoCal stands for Southern California. They provide radar air traffic approach control services to all arriving and departing aircraft at most airports in Southern California. Zobayan agrees. He's transferred to SoCal, and he tells them he's transitioning to the west and headed towards Camarillo. SoCal asks Zobayan if he's going to stay that low during the whole flight to Camarillo, and Zobayan says yes. The controller tells Zobayan that the helicopter was too low to provide flight following assistance. Both radar coverage and radio transmissions require line of sight, so aircraft flying down among the hilltops can be hard to track. As Zobayan headed for the southwestern corner of the valley, he had another problem. He had to scoot over the low pass at Calabasas. If the clouds stayed at the same height, he should be all right. But he had no way to know if the cloud cover would be the same height at the pass. Calabasas has its own microclimate, and the conditions there can be quite different from elsewhere in the San Fernando Valley. Malibu Canyon connects Calabasas to the Pacific Ocean 7 miles south, and it can funnel fog in from the sea like the smokestack on a locomotive. Still, if he got to the pass and found it socked in, Zobayan would have a couple of options. The first would be to turn back, retrace his route to Van Nuys, and let the company arrange for ground transport to get the passengers the half hour to Thousand Oaks. The second would be to land and wait for the midday sun to burn off the fog. Either option would be great, but would cause a delay for Kobe. To Zobayan, that was not an option because he was results-oriented and he loved to fly Kobe Bryant. Due to flying Bryant several times, even Vanessa knew him personally and liked him. Every time Kobe needed to get somewhere, he was the go-to guy, and they requested him by name. Zobayan was proud of that, and he wanted to keep them happy. For Island Express, part of keeping Bryant happy was getting him where he wanted to go on time, and even they had adopted this attitude. You have Kobe on board, you make it happen. Zobayan even expected the pilots who worked for him to have a similar can-do spirit. At 9:44 a.m. outside the cockpit windscreen, everything went grayish-white, as if someone had jerked down the blinds. The sudden loss of outside visual reference came as a shock for Zobayan, because these were IFR weather conditions in which his company was not licensed to fly through. Due to shock, he pulled back on the controls and started flying manually. This put him at risk of spatial disorientation. This is when the pilot has no way of telling the difference between gravity and acceleration forces unless there is some visual reference to aid them. In these cases, the pilot needs to rely on their instruments in order to avoid such disorientation. The pilot needed to fly by his instruments, climb out of the clouds, and then receive vectors from ATC to a safe landing area. He also should have activated his autopilot, at least by holding altitude or heading, and also by slowing down. But for some reason, he did neither. But he didn't declare an emergency either. At 9:45 a.m., Zobayan told the controller that he was trying to climb to 4,000 feet. As Zobayan climbed, he gradually began to bank the helicopter to the left. The helicopter was more than halfway into its climb through the clouds. At this rate, Zobayan would be in the clear in about 15 seconds. But for whatever reason, he failed to stay focused on his artificial horizon. The helicopter began to lean to the left, first gently, then steeply. Unable to see the ground, Zobayan must have misinterpreted the cues his inner ear was giving. It felt like the aircraft was banking to the right when it was actually turning to the left. The more he tried to correct it by shoving the stick to the left, the worse he made it. Disorientation tricked his mind into thinking he was leaning to the right, but in reality, he was already pointed at the ground. In fact, at the very moment that the pilot told the controller that he was trying to climb to 4,000 feet, he was already pointed at the ground and was traveling at over 200 miles per hour straight toward the ground. The aircraft then continued to descend at a rapid rate of speed and impacted the side of the mountain, where the aircraft wreckage was spread out over several hundred feet. While there was a post-impact fire, contrary to a lot of reports, none of the passengers suffered any thermal injuries, and they were all killed by the traumatic force of the crash. There was actually a mountain hiker who was waiting for her friend in the parking lot at the Juan Bautista de Anza East trailhead, just west of the pass summit, who witnessed the entire end of this flight, stating that he could hear the helicopter, and then it emerged out of nowhere through the bottom of the clouds and crashed just a couple of hundred feet from where he was standing, with debris being scattered. And then, a few moments later, there was an eruption of fire. That Sunday morning, the world was not immediately notified of Kobe's passing, but rumors started circulating around. The news seemed to put anyone who'd ever heard of him into a state of shock. Many were skeptical that this was just another internet hoax, and people began their search for answers. Those answers, at least for the next hour, would not be easy to find. A collection of false reports, poor wording, and a collective news media playing catch-up only added to confusion, frustration, and an ultimate distrust in what was being reported.
Earlier, I reported that it was believed that 4 of Kobe's children were on that flight. That is incorrect. Unfortunately, this is a horrible tragedy, and one of his daughters was on the helicopter at the time.
TMZ first reported the news that Kobe Bryant was in the crash at 11:32 a.m. PST, about 90 minutes after the call went out for a downed helicopter, according to LA County deputies. This undoubtedly left other media scrambling to confirm this information. Most took a measured approach. By now, Kobe Bryant's name was trending. At 11:56 p.m., NBA reporter Adrian Wojnarowski tweeted that Bryant was on his way to a travel basketball game with his daughter and others when the crash happened. The information was coming to the public a little slower, with more detail and more attribution. In a way, Wojnarowski's tweet marked the end of that first wave in the rush to get information. Kobe Bryant's death was a tragic event that shocked and saddened the world. He was a basketball legend, an inspiration, and a role model for many people. His daughter Gianna, who also died in the helicopter crash, was following in his footsteps as a talented young player. Many celebrities, athletes, politicians, and fans expressed their grief and condolences on social media and in public. As the world got to know more details about Kobe's and Gianna's passing, it was later revealed there were 7 other people on board the helicopter. The other victims were John Altobelli, a college baseball coach, his wife Kerry, and their daughter Alyssa, who was Gianna's teammate, Peyton Chester, another of Gianna's teammates, and her mother Sarah. Christina Mauser was a basketball coach at Kobe's Mamba Sports Academy. Ara Zobayan, the pilot of the helicopter. The autopsy revealed that Bryant suffered fatal injuries when the helicopter hit the ground. The chopper caught fire, and it was the reason the passengers weren't able to survive the tragic crash. Reports revealed that the LA Lakers legend suffered multiple trauma injuries to the head, chest, and abdomen. An inquiry by the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, found that Ara Zobayan was likely disoriented in the fog and violated federal standards. The NTSB also cited self-induced pressure as a possible contributing factor, as Zobayan may have felt compelled to complete the flight for his client despite the poor weather conditions. Vanessa Bryant, the widow of the late basketball star Kobe Bryant, filed a lawsuit against Los Angeles County over the unauthorized sharing of photos of the helicopter crash that killed her husband, her daughter Gianna, and 7 others on January 26, 2020. She claimed that the county violated her privacy and caused her emotional distress by allowing first responders to take and distribute graphic images of the crash scene. The lawsuit was filed in September 2020 and went to trial in August 2022. The jury found that Los Angeles County was liable for the invasion of privacy and awarded Bryant $16 million in damages. Bryant also settled a separate claim with the county for nearly $29 million, which included damages for negligence and wrongful death. Vanessa Bryant would also file a wrongful death lawsuit against Island Express Helicopters and the estate of Ara Zobayan. The lawsuit was settled on June 22, 2021 for an undisclosed amount. The settlement was reached with the consent of the other families who also lost their loved ones in the crash. Kobe Bryant was a legend who left an indelible mark on the world of basketball and beyond. He will always be remembered and celebrated for his contributions and his impact. As his former teammate and friend Shaquille O'Neal said, "There will never be another Kobe Bryant.